Alright, I've finished this second part of the design work, accounting for some of the stuff we talked about when I was out. And I wanted to cover a few of those things, just run them by you so that you would have that information. First, one of the things I mentioned when I was out is that I thought these margins here should be pushed out some, so that that stone veneer finishes in front of the brick on both of those sides. I think it's going to be a better looking detail. Secondly, out here you can do what you like out here, but I have reverted to having this false beam here that comes up from the columns to end the ceiling and to provide something out here, getting away from that more narrow look to this. Another thing that I've gotten away from in conjunction with that is with the beam coming down here, I got rid of this. This was that low profile beam here, which you could still do exactly as it's shown here, of course, but I went back to this sort of an arrangement here, as I thought it just looked better from inside, having a little more structure going up from that column. This is just a 1x4, this is a 1x12 that gets underneath that enough that that will lap. And I had shown this one to the same, and maybe you'll do that, but at the end I made that a little bit shorter. And then, as always, or as it was, this end of this soffit framing dies against that beam. Here then is this where this was the detail, or that was nearly flush or something like that. But I think that was, when these are built, that ought to be brought so that the surface of the scratch coat is flush with the surface of the brick. It's really hard to see it in here on this one, but the idea is that that brick comes out, or that stone comes out in front of the brick some, like that. I think that's a better detail. And here it definitely improves it just moving it, because we were so squeezed on space here, and this was going to be a really nasty detail here. So now it looks like the whole brick moves, and maybe it does, but it's not meant to. But just the column moves, and you can see that's a big improvement in here. These steps, they would run over to it. This was early. And when these steps, this isn't called out on a plan, so whatever that column is there, if there's a 3-inch margin there, we'll have a 3-inch margin there. And then have those steps as deep as we can come out here to just behind the veneer. This is roughly what I ended up with for my final interpretation. This beam actually comes down a little bit lower so that that corner dies against it. And I show a little bit more siding than that as well in the final, what the building plans are reflecting at the moment. In here, we talked about this before, this slab, if it starts here and then slopes at 3/16 per foot, it's going to be another 4 inches lower by the time it hits the hearth. And or by the time it hits those outer columns, those west columns, and I would think that all of those will be dead level. I show that around 3'10" out there at the west side, but the idea is that you could frame this bar at whatever height you want, I suppose. It does not have to be level with those, but I really think that these should be kept in that region, 3.6 to 310 overall. That then is the final soffit detail, where this is like a it's probably 2x9 or so, has to be cut with a bevel here. This block doesn't have to be here, and I have to double check on something. These 11 and 7, it's either going to be 311 7/8, or if you end up extending that patio slightly, perhaps those are 3/14s. But outside, this is about a 1x8, and this is that 1x12 and the 1x4. And then I had shown these rake or gable trims a little shorter than that 1x4. So there's the bar, and just keep in mind, as a rule of thumb, the top of the seat wants to be 12 inches below the top of your bar top. So when this is framed or put together, have the height of your chairs in mind, and then add 12 inches to that. I mean 11 or 12 to that to establish the top of that. Again, I don't think it matters if that's higher or lower than these. This, I don't know if you want to freeze that, and you can keep that. This gives you an idea of how to establish that according to what your stool height is going to be. This next section, this entire next section is going to be about dimensions and sizing of the patio itself and the bar in relation to it. First of all, when we talked last time, we talked about having the front of this hearth perhaps flush out with the front of this. Now, this was modeling the first bar in here where I had a 3-foot wide bar, and I kept this at least 12 finished. This underneath is 12 inches finished. I'd like to see that a little wider, but we'll get to that in a minute. And that gives you a 12-inch overhang on each side. Now I show it with no seating at the end. And situated up like this, 3'0" is what is called, you can edge past a seated person at 3'0". If it's only 32 inches, that is just a rising and departing space. So at 3 foot, a person can edge past. If they're coming here to this third seat, they don't have to go around. They can come past here and sit here. And situated up like this, as it's shown, with only a 6-foot bar, you still would have 2 feet here with the 3 feet there if it's kept all the way up there. This was putting another seat up at the north end and leaving this south end alone. There's nothing that says that the south end can't also come out as well, and probably should if there's some seating at the end. And so for the length of that bar and the width as well, you'll have to consider what the path is through here, and I believe I've maintained that at 3'0" right here across this diagonal. That could be a little shorter. And then, just because I said I would put some furniture in here so you could get a feel for what might fit out there. 8-foot sofa, 6-foot sofa, and there's still, I think, good pathway through here. And this was with the patio that we've been talking about in terms of how long it was going to be, about 20 feet. But we talked about pushing this chimney back and having it go through the roof. There's some additional furniture, and that's just really just for you to get a feel for that, not for me to try to furnish that. Here's where I expand that bar to more like 7 feet long, and this gets a little squeezy down through here. Maybe that's 2 feet or so. And once you're back here, you're fine walking past. It's actually probably more narrow behind those chairs than it is through this corner. And I don't know if you planned on having that big a bar in the first place. But when I try to shift, this is what has come up. When I tried to shift this back, just this piece where it's more or less flush with these caps, then what happens is it gets outside of the end of the ceiling structure. This is that false beam that goes up at on the gable end, and it gets outside of that. So I had to bring it back in to get it underneath that covering, underneath that beam, or at least have the front part of that beam come in front of it. This is when I pushed it all the way back where the front of the hearth was flush with the front of these here. This is actually 2 or 3 inches in front of the surface of the stone. And so at first I just brought it up to engage about halfway with that beam, but I thought it looked better like this. I think, well, either way looks decent to me. I guess you have to just use your own judgment. Obviously you would actually have a soffit up here. This is a problem I had to correct. And I lifted that a little bit. So instead of picking up all of that, maybe a foot or so of space, we really only picked up about 5 or 7 inches going from that. Instead of getting this 10.6 out of it, we end up with 9.9, where we were at 9.4. So we did do something, and I think it's a good arrangement anyway. However, if we wanted to talk, and this is a 20-foot 2 overall depth to the outside of those piers. If we wanted to talk about, this is where we were with this where we're going to be having to ask for 2.5 feet, 10% to pick up that corner there. And by the way, just to interject, I spoke with the zoning, and yes, a variance will be required. Even if we were only going over probably half this distance, they would still be requiring that, sadly. And the deadline for the application for that is September 24th, and the meeting is not held, hold on, till October 13th. So, and what the instruction was is you apply for the building permit and they deny it because of the overstepping, and that triggers your right to the zoning appeals hearing. He didn't tell me the exact number, but he thought it was around $500 for the application. In any event, if we're going to go to that rigmarole, perhaps we want to look at and see it was just that little 7 or 8 square feet, which is kind of silly. But as I said, if we were going to go to that trouble, and I think you'd be fine coming out here further, I think either of them is going to be open and shut because it's open frame as it is, and your location, we've already talked about this. So when I began to look at a possible expanding this some, I just looked. This presumes that the first truss, or in any case the first framing member, is back against the brick here. This, and then it's 2 foot on center coming out, and there's your 2 feet, 2 feet, 2 feet. So it looked to me like we had some space, a foot or so out here to get a little further, maybe even 16 inches, and still be just getting that one extra truss. So I thought that was a sensible way to make an expansion move. And this goes from 20'2" to about 21'6". So that adds 16 inches to the length, taking us to 11'1" in here. And this really begins to feel, even that 16 inches, I think this works fine, by the way. And additionally, if you want to bring this chimney back into the room some, you can still do that as well. You can do that with either of these plans. But so we went from 9'9", now we're up to 11'1" behind the bar seats in between here. And now you can see how the trusses work out perfectly to the end of the roof. This is just shifting the furniture around a little bit. Now we get some nice space behind here. This is 3'8" is walking past a seated person, so we're very close to that, and you can play with that however you like, and this as well. This is how it becomes a very big space, and perhaps it's too big. Perhaps this is a little more intimate here. Then I expanded that bar even a little bit further to get it to be about 40 inches wide. And this was the short one, the 20'2", with the required variance here, and we're just going to increase that now, where we're going to be asking for about 3.7 feet out of that 25. Again, I still think that's an open and shut case, and it's particularly if they're going to charge you $500 for this, you may as well. And this is where we go from the chimney under the roof like this, and pick up that extra 5 or 6 inches inside. And I think there we had no choice but to have the overhang that deep. Once we come back here, we can actually have that overhang a little less deep than that. You can see it going back there. And this is up close, I guess, perhaps. Either of these arrangements can be used, either that one or this one. But this shows you going from that 20'2" to the 21'6" is like this. And you can tell the 14 or 15 inches, whatever that was, 16 inches, is significant. I have to double check these beams to make sure the 11 7/8 will still do that. I'm pretty sure they will. Here it is from a little further away. And then in the downspouts, this kind of lends itself to this. I would just perhaps run the gutter on beyond onto the brick a little bit, and then just have a single downspout come down there and one up there on both sides. Do it that same way. This is really hard to see from this, but the changes here is out at that siding, and this is what we kind of were looking at. Well, this is with the beam coming down to the bottom of the soffit, but that has the siding coming the whole way, and that has a lot less of it, like that. As I said, it's hard to see from this angle. Yeah, I think there should be less siding, but maybe a little bit more than that, which is what I'm showing on the plans, a little bit more than that. And then these, there'll just be some two short films of overviews showing you this furniture, showing the overview. One with the shorter 20'2" length, and the other one with the 21'6" length. And I don't know if you could tell anything from that, but it might make you more comfortable with one or the other. You've seen these furniture was labeled on the plans for its size. Like getting rid of the things we don't need to see. There's coming out the extra 16. To me, either of them work. That's a downspout. You could do it that way and leave the gutter as it is, or just extend the gutter and do it like that, which I think is a lot simpler. I think you should have a gutter at that second story. I don't think you can just let that drip down. And same thing on this side. Here are those rotations, then beginning with the shorter one and then ending with the longer one. Last for this, I want to cover a few things about the plans, which are now more or less complete. First of all, I am showing for now, and it's easy enough to switch it out, I am showing for now the larger one, the 21'7" actually 21'4" when everything was said and done for these plans. But here I think these piers anyway, this obviously is all framed. You bring the concrete block up, and I would just have this concrete block too. I would just bring the concrete block up to about this level and then frame from the top of the hearth upward. But these piers, I think this is going to be a problem making these a framed walls. So I think this has to be framed walls here, and these should you should just take that 8-inch CMU and have them continuing laying it on up, and they do that right at the time, all the way to the top, and grout the top couple courses, and then cement your anchor base in up at that level there. Mainly I like this because I don't like the idea of framed walls with any kind of seamed concrete. I guess if you were to put a solid slab of concrete, but I don't know how you do that and stop the water from eventually finding its way into that framework. But B, because it's so simple, just continue these piers up to whatever you determine to be the final level here. And that way we have nice short columns up here, because we don't have a big column base, and there's no opportunity to put a big column base down here or up there, but up here at least with just a simple base, the ABW, and the single anchor, the column becomes a lot shorter, so we don't have as much sway, and it's also going, instead of be sitting all the way down here, it's sitting up on these piers that come up out of the ground. So we'll have a lot less worry with sway or anything like that. So I'm going to ultimately show those of CMU coming up here, and then of course this is framed. So I did just wanted to cover that little section because I just finished talking to the guy, and I'm actually going to show you the project that they completed, and he's a concrete person, and he thought that would be a bad idea, and I thought from the start that would be a bad idea. Whether that bar is done in frame, that was the other thing I liked about the bigger patio, was that we get that bar frame at the bottom of that, we get that a little wider, a little more stable, because I got to tell you, I wouldn't even show that 8-inch wide frame. I'm really worried if there's going to be a piece of granite or any kind of heavy top on that whole thing could tilt over, and I think there would actually be a danger of death or other injury. So I think that additionally, I think that bar should probably be block on top of thickened concrete. But if we get that base wide enough, 14 or 15 inches, and you put board on all that, I'm sure that'll be more than stable enough there as well. But here I think you almost certainly should just run the 8-inch CMU all the way up and put your columns on top of that. I think that's going to be the only reliable methodology there. That was about it on here. All these heights are called out. This 310, that would be, I guess, the tallest of them, with the grade sloping down there. 310 out there means that they would be about 3'6" in at the house. And then the bar can be whatever height you like. And this is the final part of this film. I had told you about this dyed concrete for these hearth. Now they used product from the stone manufacturer for their hearth, but they used concrete on these caps, and they had these seats, and that kind of made me go back and look at a few things and extended the arrival time of this film just a bit. But this was that project, and this concrete can be dyed any number of colors. But some of these things that they had, especially I like this step down here. I don't think we can create that with what we're doing. They had a solid wall across the back as well. But it did make me go back and look at your plan, because I kind of thought maybe that was a little open at the west end anyway. But you may think differently. But I wanted to take a quick look at it, so I came back, and while it's not possible for us to engage the way they did here with this arrangement. If we did bring this chimney back in that 5 or 6 inches, if it's out there, those shelves, if such a thing were going to be done, could only be about 10 inches wide. But if we bring that in 6 and put it back underneath the roof like that, then these can be 16 inches wide. Whether you just put plants and stuff like that on it, I have them shown, I went and modeled them and showing them at about 26 inches, like what someone might lean against, or they could actually sit on it. I mean, a bar stool for a 36-inch counter is at 24 inches. So it could have some seating or shelving, and mainly I wanted to look at it for the enclosure value. But when we move this chimney in that 5 or 6 inches, then these, and you can see how I'm just dying behind the stone here and behind the stone on the hearth, or on the chimney, those are now 16 inches wide, which is wide enough to sit on. And that would be that gable beam going over the dashed lines. So these are just some looks of this from the outside, with and without that sort of an arrangement, and without thinking about it a lot. This is, as I said, those are about 24 inches off the concrete, maybe 25. It's just with and without. Each of these is just... This is where I thought that might be a little open, but it's nice either way. And this automatically makes you think about wrapping that. That is the worst chair I've ever seen. Over here, this gets to be about 18 inches wide, and maybe it's actually brought up some like this. But that is it, and not to throw any confusion, I don't think these need to be done. I'd almost be in favor of eliminating those two though and leaving that one. But whatever you think, let me know and I can make those adjustments pretty easily. Thanks, and sorry so long.